Week 9 is in the books. As we turn our attention to Week 10, we turn our attention to Jake Crain as we do on a weekly basis, talking all things SEC football, college football, everything in between with him. Jake Crain of Crain Company, once again, joins the show here on this Wednesday. Jake, what's going on, my man? Always look forward to our conversations. Appreciate you taking the time each and every single week. What's up?
No doubt, man. Love coming on here. Really enjoy what you're doing. I mean, we're already in Week 10. God. It's amazing, man. Yesterday we were just talking about the Miami versus Florida matchup, A&M, Notre Dame, LSU, USC, and now we're looking up and the bracketology of college football is really starting to come to the forefront.
It's crazy. We're going to blink, Jake. It's going to be Thanksgiving. You know it. I know it. We all know it. It's starting to heat up. College football playoff rankings are about to drop in the coming week or so. Things are starting to get really serious. On that note, Jake, let's look back at what happened in Week 9 really quickly. I want to start with that game and get your takeaways. Obviously, College Station, Texas A&M, I thought made a major statement. Marcel Reed gets inserted in the game, and he is the spark plug for that offense. They win or outscore LSU 31-6 in that second half. Win that game 38-23. Some critical errors from Garrett Nussmeier. Texas A&M physically imposing their will in the second half, I thought as well. But all in all, Jake, a massive statement for the Aggies who now control their destiny going into November in regards to SEC championship, playoff, et cetera, et cetera. But takeaways from this game specifically, man, Texas A&M LSU at Kyle Field.
Yeah, well, finally, I pick against LSU and it works out. The two times I'd picked against them before, they found ways to win, and you got to give credit, where credit is due to what LSU has done to this point. But probably the biggest takeaways for me when I watched that game, and it felt like it was two different games. Now, if you go back and watch the first half, LSU really dominated the field position. It wasn't like they were as much dominating the line of scrimmage as they were starting in better spots than A&M was. And that's even at home. I mean, that's a taller hill to climb. LSU's defense has been playing much better. They're playing together. They're playing fundamental. So it's just really impressive to see A&M make the adjustments that they did in the second half, start winning the field position battle. And look, we can talk about LSU's offensive line, again, struggling in the run game. Pass protection-wise, they've been pretty good all year, but we expected this unit to be elite. I think you could make the case, at least from a running game standpoint, that LSU and Ole Miss's offensive lines have really underperformed. But if you're A&M, and we had Billy Lucci on Crain Company earlier in the week, I don't know how you don't start Marcel Reed. And I know you look back at that Missouri game, you say, well, they started Connor Wegman when Marcel Reed was undefeated, and, they beat Missouri to death. But when you look at a team like South Carolina and you look at these games, coming up ahead, that running element at quarterback, and Marcel Reed throws the ball well enough. I think we have a big enough sample size with him to be able to say, hey, he may not be Drew Brees, but he doesn't have to be. But when he comes in, it seems like the whole team elevates, not just the offense, but the defense as well. You could feel that momentum shift. And I think Colin Klein is a lot more comfortable calling plays than he should be with Marcel Reed in there, because people forget Colin Klein was a running quarterback too at Kansas State. And there's a lot of elements that you see in A&M's offense when Marcel Reed is in there that really kind of amplify the ability for Colin to be versatile and the ability for them to turn what should be okay plays into great plays and what should be awful plays into okay plays because of his escapability. And the defense has to defend so much more. Again, I was a defensive coordinator for 3 years, defensive coach, at the Division I level for multiple years. And nothing scared me more than a guy that could create with his legs, not just on design runs, not just Q power or power read or zone read where the quarterback keeps it, or even the RPO where the quarterback keeps it and doesn't spit it out or hand it. But is when the play breaks down and we're in man coverage and he makes a blitzer miss, or he's able to step up, make the defensive end miss, and then he takes off for 45 yards because we're in man coverage and our back is turned. It's not the DB's fault. So if you're A&M going forward, Marcel Reed, yes, he's young, but he's played in a lot of big moments. He doesn't turn the ball over. He gives you an element in the run game that I think opens up your offense. And I still don't think A&M has the greatest skill position players on the outside. But when he's in there, his running ability adds to their ability because the way you have to defend A&M is different. You don't have to the only way you'd put a spy on Connor Wegman is if Connor Wegman joined the CIA. That's the only way that you do it. With Marcel Reed, you have to almost take a guy out of coverage if you're not bringing pressure to be able to watch him, and it lets them operate in more space. Simply put, when Marcel Reed is out there, you have to defend every blade of grass. And I think he's only going to get more confident. South Carolina is a scary matchup. You know this better than anybody, Chris, because you guys are schizophrenic. You are bipolar. You're like the guy from Split. 1 minute, you're a 4-year-old boy on a tricycle. The next, you're a 45-year-old widowed British woman. Like, you just don't know what you're going to get from this South Carolina team. But I do know the athleticism on that South Carolina's front seven could cause Connor Wegman a lot of problems. And the ability of Marcel Reed, the athletic ability to get out and move, I think can negate that a little bit, whether South Carolina decides to bring pressure or they decide to just, use their base rush with a spy. So, I mean, it's very impressive what Mike Elko's doing. The drama's not there. I let off one of the shows last week with it. What did you hear about A&M in the offseason outside of, what guys win in this position group? You didn't hear anything. There was no beefs with other coaches. There was no, there wasn't multiple arrests off the field or all this talk about NIL. They're just blocking and tackling, man. And if you want to change the culture, change the mindset. And I think that's what Mike Elko was saying in that postgame presser.
Jake, did your view of Texas A&M change in regards to being an SEC championship contender or playoff contender due to that game on Saturday? Or were you already there with the Aggies, or are you still kind of wait and see?
Well, I had them 10-2. Okay. I had them going one game back. We'll see how the rest of the season plays out. Hell, in 2024, you never know what's going to happen. But I had them 10-2. I had them beating Texas at the end of the year. And again, teams evolve throughout the season, but you have to have an identity of who you are and what you are. And I'm a firm believer, and I'll always be a firm believer in this. I think most of the audience probably is too, that this is a game that is always going to be won and lost at the line of scrimmage. I don't care if it's Friday Night Tykes or the NFL. I don't care if you run the air raid or the triple option. It's won and lost at the line of scrimmage. And when I see A&M's front seven and their linebacker play has been really, really, really good, just the athletes they're able to put out there and how well they evaluated the transfer portal, especially defensively. You have guys from UAB out there. You have 5 stars from high schools in Alabama. You have defensive ends from Purdue that led the Big Ten in sacks and defensive ends that led the MAC in sacks. They hit on pretty much every evaluation in the transfer portal. And if I'm an A&M fan and I really know what's going on, if you can evaluate, whether it be in the transfer portal or whether it be in the high school or both, that is probably the hardest part of coaching college football, is being able to, it's the hardest part of the NFL, I think, is being able to project. Like, if we draft this guy, yeah, we know what he did in college. We haven't seen him in the NFL. Well, in the transfer portal in college, it's a little bit different. It's a little bit easier because you can see them against college athletes. But when it comes to high school, there's a couple guys that just transcend. I mean, Jadeveon Clowney, half of Bama's roster for a decade. That unless something happens off the field, they're going to be really good on the field. But overall, I think the evaluation process for A&M is turning into a gold standard. And if you're a fan of Texas A&M, that should give you probably the most ease out of all of it, outside of what goes on the field.
Jake, let's go to this game in Nashville. Speaking of teams from the state of Texas, we'll go to the Longhorns. They get a 27-24 win over Vandy. You know this as well as anybody, Jake. There's no such thing as a bad road win in the SEC, especially when it comes against a top 25 opponent.
Yeah.
I found it interesting, Jake. I want to get your takes on the game. Obviously, what you saw. Diego Pavia is a freaking gamer. Kid deserves all the respect. There's a lot of, I think, Jake, middle-of-the-pack SEC programs that probably should consider throwing the bag at Tim Beck, the Vandy OC, for the way he's able to scheme things up for that group, who you can obviously tell watching them don't have the personnel, but they're able to do things with motion and that option and just confuse the other side to keep themselves in ball games. But I really want to focus on, because the overarching theme, funny I say overarching theme, that I heard all weekend long in Nashville, Jake, Texas fans you talk to, the microscope that Quinn Ewers is under, and I get it, he's the quarterback at Texas, like that alone, but the microscope he is under right now. Kid completed 17 straight passes in that game. At one point, he was 19-21, I believe, over 200 in the first half. But you can just there's a lot of Texas fans, obviously, Jake, in the building, and Texas folks I talk to, you can just feel it from these Texas folks that they're just, to be fair, you watch Quinn at times and you're like, I just don't know that I'm getting everything he's capable of out of him. Is he still battling the injury? Is he for some reason hesitating to take shots or connect? I don't know. But there's also like maybe there's just this arch hunger. I mean, you know, Jake, as well as I do, the most popular guy on campus is the backup quarterback. Then you add in the backup quarterback as
it's
Arch
on
Manning.
steroids.
It's on steroids and then some. So I want your take on this game, but also, do you feel like the microscope Quinn Ewers is under, and maybe even some of the griping and complaining he's getting, do you feel like it's fair or unfair? Because even I sit there and say, like, I mean, there's a lot of teams in this conference and in college football that would kill to have Quinn Ewers under center. And it's just like, you can feel it. I'm talking to people. I'm literally, Jake, talking to people Friday night, Texas fans. They're like, yeah, you know, we know Georgia's good. Season's going fine. I don't know if we're starting the best quarterback. And I'm like, really? Like, I don't know, man. It's just like, it was very interesting. The energy was interesting.
Well, it's funny. Like I'm not going to argue with Neil deGrasse Tyson about physics or space, and I'm not going to argue with Steve Sarkisian about who should be playing quarterback. And look, fan short for fanatical. You brought up the popularity of the backup quarterback, so I'm going to answer your questions in reverse order. I'll start with Quinn in the microscope. Again, anytime you play quarterback at a place like Texas, and you've had guys like Vince Young, and we've seen in the past, you're going to be under a microscope. And I think some of the negativity that you see toward Quinn is warranted, but it's a nuanced negativity. Overall, Quinn Ewers is a damn good quarterback. Like he's a good player. He's going to get a chance playing in the NFL. Do I think he's going to be a great NFL quarterback? I do not. But I think where the legit criticism of Quinn Ewers comes in is in big games. And what do I mean by big games? Because every game is big at this point. But when you're playing a team that is equal to you or better than you, how do you perform? And we have a huge sample size over on Quinn Ewers. We've seen a lot in big games, him play really well. We've seen him play really bad. And there's a common denominator in those. A lot of it is how he starts. If Quinn Ewers starts the game off well against Bama and Georgia and these other teams, he typically finishes well and has a good game. If he does not start off well in those specific type games, he doesn't have great games. There's not a lot of in between. So when I look at a game like Vanderbilt where he turned the ball over early, Vanderbilt scored, he was able to answer. That's a great sign. You should be excited about that if you're a Texas fan. But with all due respect to Vandy and what Clark Lee's doing down there is probably going to be a saint at the end of all this. Vanderbilt is not a team that I still think scared Texas to death. Just like the Oklahoma game when Quinn got off to a bad start. They knew Oklahoma couldn't score. But then you look at Georgia, you get off to a bad start, and it's like, oh, God, they're moving the ball. They can score. What happened? Arch Manning winning the game. And I don't think it was because of injury. I don't buy into that. I watched his demeanor on the sidelines. So there is a part of Sark that I think understands that. But when it comes to overall quarterback play, Quinn Ewers is a really good player. He is. But I think the concern is when you get into this playoff and you start playing teams, and there's not a lot of them out there that can equal what Texas has on this roster. A lot of how Quinn's going to do depends on how the game starts. And that's scary because it can go either way in that setting. And you got to have the same type of mindset, whether it starts good or it starts bad. Like you look at a guy like Carson Beck. The Alabama game was a disaster in the first half. Second half, he turned up. You look at the Texas-Georgia game. Carson didn't play great through that whole game at all and turned the ball over, right? But in the moments they had to, especially that last drive, he found a way to go down there and step on their throat. So I think that's kind of the unease that some Texas fans have, and I think some of it is warranted. But thinking that putting Arch Manning in there is going to somehow make this team even better and make you more national championship ready, I just don't believe that. Now, a couple years down the road, maybe even next year to a certain extent, okay, let's see what Texas is cooking with. Give this man time to develop. And another aspect of that is Arch can run, right? Quinn really can't run. He can extend the play in other ways, right? And if he has to take off, I mean, he's not paraplegic. He's not, Mr. Glass. But when you watch Arch run, you can tell the difference. And that's fun to have that. Like they're seeing Marcel Reed run around, right? Whenever you have a dual threat quarterback that's a really good player, whenever you get a guy that's a pocket passer, you're like, God, even if he's playing good, you're like, this just isn't as exciting. Like it doesn't seem as detrimental. So I understand that. But as far as the game goes, look, Vanderbilt's got one of the best personnel teams they've had in my lifetime. And that's across the board. Skill position, what I call the big skill position, the line of scrimmage. But they still have to catch a decent amount of breaks. And a game has to go a certain way for them to win. They weren't able to dominate the time of possession against Texas like they did against Alabama. Why? Well, because a lot of it, they weren't on schedule on third down for most of the game. And when you watch what Vanderbilt does, they've got a lot of triple option concepts when they get in that diamond formation. They do a lot laterally, then hit you vertically. And it's brilliant by Tim Beck because it negates some of the defense's athleticism. And most of the games that Vanderbilt play, regardless of how much better their roster is than it's been in the past, they're not going to be as athletic as Alabama. They're not going to be as athletic overall as Texas. They may be in some spots, but not in all spots. So when you run this kind of misdirection system, it creates a lot of one-on-ones, right? Tackling in space, and the eye discipline has to be perfect, but it still slows you down on defense. Because it's like, I can speed read easy words, but when you start putting long words in there, I can't speed do a Sudoku. Like, I've got to sit down and be like, that's a 6. All right, a 6 is here. That's what you have to do on defense. And when you do that, it makes you play a little bit slower. It's kind of like a quarterback seeing moving coverage during the middle of a play. Like, a lot of times you're not just going to be like, boom, ball's out. Not like you're throwing the hot. It's, oh, my God, that other safety went back there too high. Where's my read? There's 2, there's 3, there's the check down. It makes you go a little bit slower. It's almost like the check down of defense. But when you're in 3rd and 7 and 3rd and 9 and obvious passing downs, that makes it a lot easier on the defense because you become predictable. They against Alabama, they were 3rd and 3. They were 3rd and 1. They were 3rd and 5. And they were just killing them in the flats, right? Just killing them in the flats, faking the run, especially out of that diamond set, or at least that's what I call it. Some people call it something different. But then offensively, one of the reasons Quinn was able to complete all those passes, he wasn't throwing the ball really down the field. He was getting the ball in open space, kind of using what Vanderbilt did in a different way against Vandy. And what did you see? Vanderbilt wasn't able to tackle in space nearly as well as they were against Alabama. Now, why was that? It's not because Texas just has so much better players on offense than Alabama. No, but Texas and Quinn Ewers was getting the ball out quick underneath as opposed to what Jalen Milroe was trying to work down the field, find Ryan Williams, even digs, right? Even deep crossers. That takes a little time to develop. Quinn was throwing swings. Quinn was throwing hitches. Quinn was throwing, comebacks. They were making a guy miss and getting 17 yards, and then he would hit you, right, with the deep back shoulder. Or then he would hit you with the post, or they would run Poco or some type of post-wheel combination. So the game just didn't go how it had to go for Vanderbilt, and they still made it close. That's because they're a lot better than what they were.
Jake, let's go to that game in Tuscaloosa, Alabama.
And you won't get a better explanation than that.
That was on point.
You want to watch.
That was on point. And by the way, to your point, I do have to laugh because in the midst of that game, again, fan short for fanatical, in the midst of that game, like one of the complaints Texas fans I heard over the weekend and even in the stadium was, God, he's checked down Charlie, dumping it off. And like the perfect encapsulation of this, Jake, there was a certain play. I don't recall exactly which one, but he throws like either a check down or like a bubble screen or whatever. And the people behind me are like, no, Quinn, what are you doing? And then the guy breaks for like 15 yards and he goes down to like, yeah. So I'm just
it's funny because like Quinn, say what you want about Quinn Ewers, but a lot of times he makes the right decision with the ball. Yeah. I mean, what is something that kind of balances out his lack of explosive ability running? It's his IQ. That's why Sark loves him, right? That's why he's Sark's guy. Sark's a cerebral guy. Quinn has to be because he can't just go out there and Nick Marshall everybody, right? And be like, oh, well, it's one read and then I'm going to take off and turn this thing into Cirque du Soleil. No, he has to be right. He has to be precise. That is his game. Now, every quarterback wants to be, but some don't have to be. Quinn has to be.
Jake, going to that game in Tuscaloosa, Bama dominates Mizzou 34-0.
Best bet on the board. Yeah. Best bet on the board. It's like stealing.
How good should Bama fans feel about picking on a wounded Missouri squad?
Well, I think defensively, you got to feel better. I know they were beat up, but it's a confidence builder. I think when you look at this Missouri team, if I'm an Alabama fan, offensively, I'm not in love with what I saw. Especially early in that game, they slogged around, looked a little bit, discombobulated. It wasn't fluid. It wasn't rhythmic. Missouri was able to hang in that game for a while because Alabama just really wasn't able to move the ball, and it just still feels like Jalen Milroe was trying to make a heroic play every play instead of doing what he did against Georgia. Look, if I'm going to need to take off, I'll take off. If I need to check it down, I'll check it down. Guys open here, I'm going to hit them. I don't have to make the heroic play down the field every time, right? And you're going to get your quarterback design runs, and they're going to give Jam and Justice and the rest of the Jays the ball that they got in the backfield. But, if you're an Alabama fan, the standard is so high still. And I know, you hadn't won a national championship, 3 years, maybe going on 4, but the standard is still so massively high at Alabama that anything less than perfection is going to be looked at as disappointment. Even if you play pretty well, if you don't look good doing it, there's not going to be that great feeling. So do I think that Alabama fans should feel better about, their team after last week? To a certain extent. But I think there's a lot of them that are out there, and I think they're right, because they compare themselves to the top, to the Oregons, right? To these top level teams, and they know what a championship team looks like. And I don't think Alabama looks like a national championship team. But the good news for Alabama is you still got really good personnel. You still got a really good quarterback, and college football is wide ass open. But the problem now is you have to be perfect. You can't lose at LSU, right? We'll see what happens down the stretch. 3 losses does not get you in to the college football playoff, even if you're a humongous brand like Alabama is.
Jake, before we turn our attention to Week 10, let me congratulate you. The Auburn Tigers are on the board. Auburn's on the board. SEC win.
All right.
Let's
Kentucky,
go.
Suck it. All right.
Who knew when you feed Jarquez Hunter, good things will happen. Just take a moment, man, revel in it. We haven't gotten the opportunity to talk about many Auburn wins on these segments with you. So 24-10 final. Again, Jarquez Hunter goes for 278 against that Kentucky defense. Your thoughts on the game?
Well, if you've watched Auburn, Jarquez Hunter's been running unbelievably well this whole year. I mean, one guy can't take him down. Even when, there's been moments where the box is heavy, and we saw that against Kentucky, he still finds a way. That's why it's so baffling that Auburn kept calling RPOs and giving Peyton Thorne the chance to pull the ball in big moments on short yardage, whether it be against Georgia, whether it be against Cal. Dude, give Jarquez the ball, and unless you're blocking, get the hell out of the way. I mean, and this isn't, trying to figure out what happened at the end of Interstellar. Like, and Hugh Freeze even said it during the game during the post-game press conference. Like, even when the numbers weren't there, we called running plays for Jarquez, and he almost popped for 300 against a Kentucky defense that's pretty damn good against the run. I mean, say what you want about Kentucky, and they've got their problems. Believe me, Kentucky fans know that. But they've done a pretty good job of mucking things up against teams that want to run the ball. I mean, look what they did against Ole Miss. Look what they did against Georgia. So this is a defense that does have some cachet. But when you look at this Auburn team, I think the most impressive part is that you've had an unbelievably disappointing year. You have some young guys you should feel really excited about. But you're 2-5, whatever it was. You go on the road to Kentucky. You're down 10-0 early. Peyton Thorne throws a pick, but you're able to bounce back. And it actually looked like Kentucky was the team that laid down once Auburn got up, as opposed to this Auburn team laying down. And I think a lot of it is this young foundation. This is why I keep telling Auburn fans, look, you be disappointed. You should be disappointed. Be critical. You should be critical. There's been a lot of coaching errors, which that includes the players on the field. I was a coach. The buck stops with the coaches. Either you're coaching it or you're allowing it to happen. It's on you. But this young group, I mean, they had 6 freshmen on the field against Kentucky in the second half. And Hugh Freeze and them aren't just recruiting a type of player. They're recruiting a type of person, because the older leadership at Auburn, and they seem like great guys. You don't hear about them getting in trouble off the field. They're great in the community. But this is a zero-sum game, and you are judged on wins and losses when you go to a place like Auburn. If you don't want it to be that way, open up a nonprofit, start a daycare, do something like that. But Auburn fans expect you to win. There's a reason this money gets poured in. There's a reason people drive from all over. There's a reason people spend hard-earned money in a bad economy to be able to go watch a football game. They want to see you win. And I think this young group on the team, Falk, who's a hell of a player, Jay Crawford, hell of a player, DeMarcus Riddick, hell of a player. Offensively, you look at guys like Cam Coleman and Perry Thompson and Malcolm Simmons and some of these other younger guys. Connor Liu, right on the offensive line. I think they're different, because it's one thing to play hard. It's another thing to be clutch. Mm-hmm. And Hugh Freeze and them are recruiting that type of player to come to Auburn, that type of person to come to Auburn. Because it's easy right now, Chris, to go to a place where the train's already running on time, where it's just a continuation. it takes a different type of person to come in and say, you know what, we want to be the start of it. We want to be the change. And that's the type of person that Hugh Freeze and them are trying to bring in. And that's why I think Auburn fans, and there's enough games to salvage something. Hell, you beat Alabama in the Iron Bowl. It's a successful season. You can say what you want, but the odds of that are pretty slim. But when you look at the future, I still feel good about what Hugh Freeze and them are cooking because of the type person, not just the type player athletically that they're bringing in and that they've already got on the roster.
And Jake, as we turn our attention to Week 10, here comes Diego Pavia. Hugh Freeze is going to try to do something he hadn't done before, which is beat Diego Pavia on the field, going back to his Liberty days. But I want to start Week 10, Jake. World's largest outdoor cocktail party, which is what we still call it. Georgia, Florida this weekend in Jacksonville. Two-parter for you. Certainly thoughts on the game. I've seen mixed reads on this game. Some people think Georgia's just going to go out there and steamroll Florida. Others think Florida can actually make this a pretty tight game, maybe force some turnovers, make this at least interesting into the second half. A lot of dynamics in this game with the Trevor Etienne, Jaden Rashada. The bad blood obviously doesn't even begin to describe it, which this rivalry doesn't need any extra juice. On that note, though, Jake, when you think of great SEC rivalries, because I've gotten this question definitely from Texas and Oklahoma fans because they're like, hey, this isn't a game we've ever paid attention to. Do SEC fans care about this game is the question I've gotten, Jake. I'm just kind of curious for you growing up. Was this a game that, because for me, it was always Iron Bowl, Deep South's oldest rivalry, third Saturday in October. Cocktail party was there. I mean, it was a notable game. Been very streaky. I think from like 1990 to 2010, Florida was like 17-3. Spurrier didn't lose to Georgia. Then since then, I think Georgia's won like 12 of the last 15. Kirby's essentially dominated them. The games, a lot of them haven't been close. So anyways, two-parter, thoughts on the game, and then just overall thoughts on the rivalry for you, kind of where it sits in the SEC hierarchy.
Well, I mean, I think it's up there. I don't think it's to the level of the Iron Bowl, but it's in the top of that second tier. It's a hugely important game, especially when both teams were in the East. I think people have already forgotten. We used to have divisions. This was a massive game in that division to see who would play whoever came out of the West. In the SEC championship game. So, yeah, I don't think these fan bases like each other at all. They have no reason to. It's not like they share the same state together and there's like a hate but also respect. I just think this is good old-fashioned hate. I think this is just North Korea, South Korea, dog. Like, listen, we're up here, y'all down there. Y'all want what we want. We want what y'all got. We hate the way y'all do things. Y'all hate the way we do things. And I love that. So, yeah, I think it's unbelievably important even without divisions. Now, as far as the on-field game will go, I think it's more about Georgia than anything because if Georgia goes and plays well, even if Florida plays clean and well, Georgia's going to win, right? So the question is, will Georgia play well? And I hear everybody talking, and it's not like Georgia hadn't scored any points. Like if you just look at the stats, this is why like people that just look at stats or box scores and then make their mind up off that. Not that you shouldn't use that, but that's like a trailer to a movie. Like it'll show you some of it. It'll show you a little bit, enough to get you intrigued, but it doesn't tell the whole story of what actually happened. That's why watching the game, the eye test, is such a crucial thing. And it all goes into the pot of trying to figure out what's going to happen or figure out where a team is. So even though Georgia's had some good numbers, and everybody talked about, well, this isn't the Georgia team defensively, even after what they did against Texas. And I agree, this isn't the most elite unit Georgia's had on defense. But offensively, I don't think they're what they were. Lad McConkey and Brock Bowers did a lot. You look at Van Pratt, the center, who Carson Beck told me at SEC Media Days during the summer, he's the one who called the protections out my first year, which takes a huge load off of the quarterback. And I think Carson's done a better job of that. But I don't think they are who they have been on either side of the ball. Now, Kirby's teams tend to get better as the year goes on. So we'll see how it finishes, and that's what counts. It's not if you get hot, it's when you get hot. So on the field, if Georgia plays well, I think they're going to win. But if you're Florida, the only chance you have is one, you have to play clean. You've got to. There can't be these mistakes that we've seen from Billy Napier's group in the past. And it's in all three phases. Can't have two guys with the same number on there on special teams on 4th and 4. You cannot give Georgia extra possessions. You cannot hit a guy out of bounds when it's 3rd and 9 and they throw for 6 and they got to punt, but you hit them late. You've got to play damn near perfect from that standpoint. And if you do, with DJ Lagway's running ability, and if I'm Billy Napier, I know if I win this game, I'm safe. I am safe because I'm probably going to beat Florida State at the end of the year as bad as it's going there. So I'm pulling out all the stops in this one, especially when you look at the rest of that schedule going down the stretch, which is like getting hit in the nuts with a baseball bat. It's just awful. And we talked about that before the year, and that's with Florida State being bad. So there's going to be more quarterback design runs if I'm Florida in this game. I'm pulling every stop that I have, every trick out of the bag to try and win the time of possession and just keep it a game in the second half and in the fourth quarter. Because the longer this game is close, the more confident Florida is going to get, especially if Florida can come out early and show Georgia, hey, we can play with you all a little bit. And there is that aspect that you brought up of the personal vendetta, which is a thing that coaches tap into all the time. And it is an unbelievably motivating factor for 18 to 22-year-olds. If I'm a Florida coach before the game, I'm putting a picture of ETN up there and saying he didn't think y'all were good enough. He didn't think this place was going to – we're at the University of Florida, one of the meccas of college football, but this guy didn't think you were good enough. Not only that, he went to one of our rivals. He went to Georgia. So now you're going to pay the piper. You want to sleep on me, I'm about to introduce you to who I really am. Now, having said all that, even if they say all that, if Georgia goes out and plays well, they're going to win the game. So I'm ready to see, which team plays clean, which team plays confident, and what Billy does in the quarterback running game with Lagway, because I'm very fascinated to see it, because it's the only way to truly get a hat on a hat in the run game if you're an offense.
Yeah, Jake, my mind on a side note goes to, and what I envision Florida players will want to do, what coaches will want to see. I go back to that Brandon Spikes play against No Sean Moreno, where he's just essentially on top of him, jawing him. That's what they'd like to do. Now, I don't know if anybody on Florida's roster is quite Brandon Spikes, but, you get the idea. And excited, by the way, Jake, I'll be experiencing my first ever cocktail party down in Jacksonville this weekend.
Yeah, not your first ever cocktail.
Not my first cocktail party.
I've seen you in action.
Yeah, not my first cocktail party. First cocktail party on the field.
Well, it's not about hurting the player. It's about hurting the player's feelings.
Hurting his ego, yeah.
Yeah, that's what I want. I want you, when you walk off that field, to understand that you could have been part of this.
Yeah.
That you were part of this, but you thought you were too good. You thought you were better than everybody else. Well, you're not, and I'm about to make you. But Florida's going to come out hunting now.
Yeah.
And they got some cats that can run on defense. So if you're Georgia, you go out there confident. Hell, you're Georgia. You've been the cream of the crop. But Florida's going to come out there hunting. How long does that last, and how clean can Florida play? Because there's a balance, Chris. You can be over emotional. Mm-hmm. Yeah. That used to scare me to death, because even as a coach, I was over emotional. I mean, I'm freaking out before the games, dude. Like it's a very emotional thing, but you have to check yourself, because you can be underhyped and you can be overhyped. It's the Goldilocks porridge. Oh, this one's too hot. Oh, this one's too cold. Oh, this one's just right.
And to your point, expect Florida, I would imagine, to empty the clip. Can Georgia eliminate the turnovers, Jake? Big question for me. That's a big question going in. Can they play clean? Let's go to a game, Jake, kind of under the radar, I feel like, this weekend. The Arkansas Razorbacks hosting Ole Miss. Sneaky game here in Fayetteville, man. Sneaky game.
Yeah.
Ole Miss has just been kind of trudging along. They got the win over Oklahoma last week. They were trailing at half. Offense wakes up. Offense hasn't scored, Jake, 30 or more in 4 straight contests. And, Arkansas, I don't want to overreact to a game against Mississippi State, but, I mean, they're just, man, they're like many teams middle of the pack this year, hot and cold. And if Taylor Green gets hot and the offense gets humming, and you just never know what you might get. Yeah. So, what's your read into this football game?
Well, I mean, if you're an Ole Miss or Texas A&M fan this weekend, I mean, it's just scary. I'll go back to what I said about South Carolina. Arkansas is kind of the same way. I would rather know what I'm getting, like what I'm going up against. Mm-hmm. Because Taylor Green as a thrower has kind of been up and down, right? He's electric as a runner. He's a big guy. He's a long strider, but he's quick twitch, which is scary. And Lenora Sellers can run at South Carolina, right? So there's some similarities. But when I look at Ole Miss, the thing that probably worries me the most is the offensive line's been a letdown. Mm-hmm. And if you watch what Travis Williams, the Arkansas defensive coordinator, really does, and they've got good personnel at Arkansas, but they don't have elite personnel on defense. So he has to take risks. And I think the common misconception is you think a risk is just a blitz. Well, yeah, that's a risk, but there's more risk. Stunning the front, slanting the front, right? Running games in the front. And Travis Williams, his hit rate, right, on these is very, very high. That game against Tennessee, he almost pitched a perfect game. Mm-hmm. Pretty much did, with the movement up front. So I'm interested to see if he's going to take those gambles early, or if he's going to say, you know what? I think we can just line up and kick y'all's ass out of an overfront or an underfront. So I'm interested to see how he goes at it at first. So if you're an Ole Miss fan, that's what I'm looking at the beginning of the game. Because Ole Miss's problem isn't defense. And it's weird to sit here and say that. We're in a world now where we're looking at Tennessee and Ole Miss like, what, defense ain't the problem when you look at it. So I'm kind of in a weird
feels like
spot.
opposite day.
Yeah, I'm kind of in a weird spot if I'm an Ole Miss fan, because I'm like, we're going in this game and I'm not really as worried about the defense. But what I think it's going to come down to, everybody's going to talk about Taylon Green running, and they should. But when you look when Ole Miss is really cooking, Jackson Dart running is what's up. That LSU game, which they led for all of regulation pretty much until the end and then lost in overtime, Jackson Dart was their best runner, I thought. So you kind of fight fire with fire a little bit, and that'll slow down that Arkansas front. I think this is going to be a close game. I actually think this is going to be a more low-scoring game than what some people are thinking. I'm leaning toward Ole Miss squeaking it out right now. But I tell you, man, this Arkansas team is just dangerous. They're just scary. Because, I mean, you look at some of the receivers they got. I mean, they're big-bodied, kind of NFL guys.
I think it's one of the most underrated receiver groups in the country.
I agree. I mean, they have strong hands. They're good after the catch, and they block. And when you have a quarterback that can run like that, that blocking downfield becomes massive. So I think it's going to be tight. I think it's going to be somewhat low-scoring. It's a scary ass game if I'm an Ole Miss fan, and if you're Arkansas, you can find a way to win this one. Yeah, you ruin Ole Miss's season. They ain't going to the SEC championship or the playoff at 9-3, and this would be their third loss. You can keep kind of turning the tide in Fayetteville in the first year of. I think some people forget this is Bobby Petrino's first year at Arkansas. He hadn't been there 2 years. Some people think he's been there multiple years. This is year one, so it's going to be an interesting time in Fayetteville.
Jake, on that note, Bobby Petrino, year one in Fayetteville as the OC last weekend, over 600 yards of offense. That was the third time that's happened this season. So
they ran the checkup on him.
Yeah, he did indeed. Another game, Jake, again, you already hinted at it, but just really quickly, one where who knows what's going to happen. South Carolina, Texas A&M. You mentioned I was in this building 2 years ago when South Carolina got their only win over Texas A&M in the 10 meetings previous. That game obviously had an opening kickoff for a touchdown, turnovers. It was the perfect recipe for South Carolina to snap the streak. Texas A&M comes in with a top 10 ranking. I think what's interesting, South Carolina off the bye, which obviously we saw them earlier in the season against Ole Miss, didn't exactly translate the way they would have hoped. That defensive front and defense is as good as any in college football. Feels like it comes down to how many battles realistically can they win at the point of attack on the offensive line. And what does Lenora Sellers give you? This is a big opportunity. You've mentioned it, Jake, many times. I feel like you've kind of led the campaign on this. And it's like, hey, South Carolina, here you are again. Another opportunity.
Yeah.
I'm going to show up.
I mean, hell.
Yeah.
How many big at-bats can you get?
How many times can you come up
They're
with
like that 7-hole hitter that always finds himself up with 2 outs and runners on second and third in a one-run game.
Yeah.
I always try and lean toward the teams that have been the most consistent. I think A&M, I know the quarterback position's been back and forth, but they've been pretty consistent. I feel like we know who A&M is more than we know who South Carolina is consistently. Not at their best or at their worst. I mean, we've seen that. But it's been the up and down, and that can be scary for a team going in there because you could catch them on their best day. But I think Marcel Reed's going to start. We'll see. I mean, Mike Elko's the one at practice, not me. But I think South Carolina's defensive front seven is so athletic, and they're so talented, and they're so powerful, and they can run so well that they can kind of negate Marcel Reed's ability to run a little bit. So I think this is going to be a game where if Marcel does start, South Carolina's going to make him prove he can throw it. Now, on the other hand, and I think he can. We're going to see. He's played on the road before. It's not going to be great, but it's not going to be awful. But then on the South Carolina side, I think A&M's just going to run their guys out there, do their base stuff. And I think they're going to be able to hold up against the South Carolina offensive line and make Lenora Sellers have to beat him through the air. And this is going to be a battle of which young, dynamic quarterback can have the most success through the air in this game. And that makes me think you're probably going to get a couple turnovers. You may get a defensive touchdown. And when you look at the way the bookies are playing this, they think it's basically a pick 'em. And South Carolina's at home. I think it's scary for A&M. I'm not ready to pick a side yet on this one. But it's consistency versus the up and down. And a lot of times in that situation, I will lean on consistency. And sometimes, Chris, going on the road, it can galvanize guys. It can help out sometimes there's a lot of guys. I mean, my brother's the same way as I am. I used to like playing on the road better than at home. I love people getting loud when something good happens, but there ain't nothing like shutting up a bunch of people. That's the best. That Eminem 8 Mile, you went to Cranbrook moment when everybody's like, wow, like y'all came in here and did this. So it's a great matchup. It's scary, but if A&M gets through this one, whoo, every one you get off, it's closer to clinching. It's closer to clinching that spot. And they've never played in Atlanta before in the SEC championship. So it's going to be fascinating. South Carolina's going to be rocking. We went up there when I was at South, and it was the towels are waving. The I mean, I thought they were going to start a tornado up there.
And to your point, Jake, each one you knock off, we're allowed to look ahead. Maybe they aren't, but you look ahead of that Lone Star Showdown and what may be on the line, what will probably be on the line, at least for one side, it is going to be insane. Jake, final thing, how big of a game is this for Hugh Freeze and Auburn to get that Diego Pavia monkey off the back? And I mean, again, listen, Auburn's favored. I feel like Auburn fans probably feel like this is a game you should win, you better win. You mentioned, like, you can still salvage a bowl game. And I mean, listen, I know bowl games aren't what they were, but going to a bowl game is a lot better than not going to one.
There's some confidence that can be salvaged here, and there's a decent way to go. You have time to kind of flip the script a little bit, not all the way, but a little bit. When I look at this game, I mean, there should be wanted posters for Diego Pavia all over Auburn. But what should worry you as an Auburn fan is that's what he wants. Like, that's what Diego Pavia wants. Like, he wants to walk in the saloon and everybody go, like, oh no, he's back. But if you're an Auburn player, I mean, I watched Eugene Asante talk about they want that. They were embarrassed last year when he was in New Mexico State. But one thing that should scare you, there's a couple things, but one is I mentioned there were 6 freshmen on the field in the second half of that Kentucky game. Well, freshmen and eye discipline don't really go good, whether it's on the football field or at a bar late at night after a couple drinks. So Auburn's going to have to kind of play older than they are on defense if they're going to play those guys, but they should win the game. I think if you put pressure on Vanderbilt early to have to take shots, which means you score on offense, that's when they get out of their element, and that's when I think you can see the worst version of Diego Pavia.
Jake, final one for you, stepping out of the SEC. You guys have previewed this game already, but certainly it's one that I think even SEC fans no doubt will have their eyes on. Penn State, Ohio State. Which way you leaning in that game?
God, I like Penn State, dude. And
Really?
People, if they just look at their records, they're going to be like, oh, well, it's just classic Penn State.
They're going to say this is the game Penn State never wins.
Yeah, but if you've actually watched Penn State, this is a different Penn State team. Their defense is still really, really, really good. But bringing in Andy Kotelnicki from Kansas, maybe the best offseason coordinator hire in the country. When you look at their explosive ability, not just from an athlete standpoint, and I don't think they actually have the most explosive athletes that they've ever had. They've got some good backs. They ain't got Saquon. Like, they've got some good receivers, but it's not the best crop they've ever had. But this offense has matched with Drew Aller. Drew Aller, that was a question. Does he have the ability to hit those shots and the confidence to take them? And he does. This Penn State team, what has hurt him in the past against Ohio State and Michigan is they just couldn't score. They'd stop you for a while, but eventually that dam would break. I think this Penn State team is different. And I'm not 100% sold on Ohio State. They got a $20 million roster, but I've watched every game they've played. And there's some questions on that offensive line, and there's a part of Will Howard that I still don't trust. I don't know what it is. I just don't trust him. So give me Penn State in this one, Chris.
You heard it. Jake Crain of Crain Company, one of the best in the business. He takes time each and every single week to join us. Jake, appreciate you taking the time. Let the folks know what you guys have got in the pipeline over at Crain Company and where to find it.
Oh man, it's cooking over in the kitchen at Crain Company. If you like this show, you like talking college football, we talk some NFL. You can find us on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Roku. It's Crain Company, CRAINN Company. We go live 2 to 3:30 p.m. Central each weekday. We take live calls, have a live chat. If you can't catch us live, it stays on demand. If you like this show, you'll probably like ours.
Hardest working man in showbiz. Jake, appreciate you taking the time, man. We'll do it again next week.
Anytime, Chris. Appreciate you, buddy.